This meeting is being recorded.
And then the next thing I'm going to do is share my screen. You know what I think I will do? Give me 1 second on that. I'm going to use my second screen here. That'll make it so much easier. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so can you all see my screen?
Yes.
That I have up?
Yes.
Perfect. And basically what I've got on these slides is nothing more and nothing less, other than the signature page of the actual Senate Bill 21 -091. And this is the bill that has kind of changed the situation here in Colorado. This was passed during the 2021 legislative session. And I'm going to keep it so that we can go back and forth. So I've got the pane open with the 6 slides over here on the left so that I can easily traverse back and forth as we go through this. But what I would love to do is introduce Nick is on the call with us this morning, and he is he is with the Colorado Restaurant Association, and his name is Nick Hoover, and he worked as a lobbyist to help pass this bill. So in Colorado, there's a really, I think when some of us hear the term lobbyist, we think, ooh, dirty. No, we don't want that. And I'm here to say, I don't think it's like that here in Colorado. Having done some testifying down at the State House and worked with multiple lobbyists now over the years, I find that there is a very cooperative relationship between our legislators and our lobbyists and the organizations that the lobbyists are representing. So obviously Nick represents the Colorado Restaurant Association, and this restaurants are one of the industries that obviously take a lot and process a lot of credit card transactions. So it was a bill that was of tremendous interest to them. So Nick, welcome, and thank you very much for joining those of us here in Evergreen in the foothills. It's a beautiful morning up here, and typically about 10 degrees cooler than what you get down in Denver. So you'll have to come up and join us sometime.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy. And I've spent plenty of time up in Evergreen. I actually thoroughly enjoy getting into the mountains as much as I can. So been into a lot of the places around in Evergreen. So beautiful area. And I am jealous of the fact that it's 10 degrees cooler on average, because this central Minnesota born and raised boy doesn't remember growing up in 90 degrees to 100-degree weather. So this is not normal for me. But thank you for that, Nancy. Yes, I am Nick Hoover. I'm a manager of government affairs with the Colorado Restaurant Association. I am a registered lobbyist in the state of Colorado. Yes, that term does on occasion have some negative connotations. However, we really view ourselves in the association as the kind of the information experts, the policy experts, not so much the lobbyists that you would think of. So just to give you some background on Senate Bill 91, this bill really came around because a lot of retail businesses, including restaurants, are obviously, most of their transactions are happening with credit cards. In the restaurant industry, I believe it's about 90 to 95% of restaurant transactions are being done with credit cards. And with the previous law stating that you were not allowed to charge a fee for the use of credit cards, that automatically meant that you can pretty much just account for 3% of your revenue going to credit card processing right off the bat. So that was really the impetus for us to support this legislation. We worked very closely with the Petroleum Marketers Association and then also the Retail Council in getting this legislation done. Basic information about this piece of legislation and what specifically changes. So before this legislation passed, the only entities that were allowed to charge customers credit card processing fees were state and local governments or government agencies. That is still the case even after this goes into effect, and this bill does go into effect on July 1 of this year. Now, on July 1, retailers will be allowed to charge credit card processing fees back to the consumer. There are some rules around it, and I'll go through pretty much the basics of those rules. First things first, and Nancy, if you scroll to the second panel, we can see that this is the exact language that the business has to post in a visible place where the consumer is going to see it if they are charging credit card processing fees back to the consumer. Now, obviously, that's going to change from the business type. I always, because I work for the Restaurant Association, I always think of restaurants. For a restaurant that is a quick service with a single cash register area, this sign near that cash register where customers are going to see it is going to be acceptable. Same for a retail location that has a single cash register, because that's where the customers are going to be paying and they're going to see it. For a sit-down restaurant that has maybe one point of entry to a host stand, maybe you can have it behind the host stand and that would be acceptable. Unlike a lot of signs that exist in Colorado law, there aren't specific size requirements for this particular sign. However, I do want to caution you that if you are going to put this sign up, you should make it as visible as possible without being obstructive and inappropriate for your business. I know that businesses are very conscious about how their business looks, and you don't want to obviously make it too big, but I wouldn't make it so small that they can't read it. And then in a sit-down restaurant, you could even put this on a menu. I would not put it on a receipt because that would probably be too late, but it does have to be posted if you are charging those fees. When it comes to the actual fees, this is where it gets important. So the way the bill is written, it is drafted, and Nancy, I don't know if it's on the first or the third slides. Trying to see here. Give me 1 second. Can you try the next slide? Not sure if I'm going to be able to find it very quickly, but I'll tell you this. Essentially, when it comes to the charging of the fees, it is, oh, here it is. So it's this bottom language in paren I under C. It would be when you're charging the fees, you can charge the exact amount of the credit card processing fee up to 2%. So essentially what that means is this: if your credit card processing fees are 1.8%, you can charge 1.8%. If your credit card processing fees are 3%, you can charge 2% because 2% is the max. So that is how this works. You can't, if your credit card processing fees are 1.8%, you cannot charge 2%. It has to be the exact amount of the fee, or your processing fee, or 2%, whichever is lesser, essentially. When it comes to the charging of credit card processing fees, they are very specific in the bill that these fees are only allowed to be charged on credit cards. They are not allowed to be charged on debit cards. They are not allowed to be charged on cash or check or the redeeming of a gift card. These are just for credit cards. And then, like I said, it goes into effect on July 1 of 2020. That is the very basic information of this bill. I will say that before this presentation, there were questions that Philip had sent me that I guess had come from some people within the city of Evergreen that I just wanted to touch on very, very briefly. There is a section of the law, and I'm trying to find it real quick to show you. Can you scroll down? One more. There it is. So paren E. a seller may impose only a single credit card charge or surcharge per sale or lease transaction. This was brought up because I guess there are either business or downtown improvement districts or downtown surcharges or fundraising charges or foundation charges, I mean, in the city of Evergreen that businesses have to charge. This section that paren E falls into is referencing only the credit card or the processing of fees for credit card processing. So essentially what E is saying is you can only charge one fee per transaction for credit card processing fees. It is not prohibiting you from charging fees for, say, a back of house in a restaurant. This is becoming more and more popular, a back of house surcharge, or say a hospitality included surcharge, or in the case of Evergreen, a foundation improvement surcharge, or I'm not sure exactly what it's called. So essentially, this is just saying you can only have the one charge for credit card processing. It is not prohibiting you from having other surcharges on the bill. So just wanted to make sure I got that cleared up right off the bat. And then the last thing I would say, and I don't have the exact fines and penalties that would be associated with this, but if a retail business is in violation of any portion of this bill, for example, maybe they're not posting the sign, maybe they're charging a surcharge above 2% or above their actual credit card processing fees, it would end up being a violation of the Colorado Consumer Protection Act, which falls under the Attorney General's office in the state of Colorado. They aren't going around doing audits on these, on this law in particular. However, it would be a complaint-based investigation if it were to come forward. So if a customer complained, the AG's office would likely begin some sort of an investigation. And then you could end up with potentially civil penalties, fines and fees. But that's kind of my presentation for you all. Hoping you all have questions that I might be able to dive into. I should have said this right off the top. I am not an attorney, so this is not to be construed in any which way, shape, or form as legal advice. However, this is the interpretation of the groups that worked on this legislation, especially while it was being passed. And if you need solid legal advice, I'd be more than happy to try and find or I know an attorney that I could reach out to that'd be able to help you. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that anyone might have.
Before we do that, Nick, I want to add a couple of other details. Number one, recognize that as a business, you probably accept Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express. And all four of these cards probably charge you different fees. And my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, is that if you are going to charge your patrons credit card processing fees, you need to reach out to each of them and register to say that you are going to be participating in this program. So I want to kind of give you that heads up. And then the second thing I wanted to point out is that in addition to the signage that you need to have that's accessible to all of your patrons, and I think you gave some great examples, Nick, thank you. It also needs to be delineated specifically on the receipt as a separate credit card processing fee. So that's also in turn going to mean that you are going to need to speak with your point of sales provider so that is not highlighted, but separated as a separate line item and indicated as credit card fee processing or something to that effect. Did I misspeak on either of those that you're aware of, Nick?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Nice job.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of the down and dirties. You know, definitely reach out to your credit card processing firm that you utilize, and you know, take a look at what you're paying in credit card processing fees. As I said, there's probably a range. So you're going to need to, is it an average of them not to exceed 2%?
It's my understanding it is the exact charge. So it might get a little complicated if you've got a Visa, if you've got a MasterCard, and they're two different charge rates. You might have to charge a 1.6 to a 1.8 or a 2% or a 1.8. It could be a little bit complicated, but it's my understanding based off of the passage of this legislation and interpretation of it that it's supposed to be the exact charge of the processing fees. Now, it doesn't say specifically in the bill, and it wouldn't, that if there are different processing fees for different cards, that you have to charge the specific fee for that card. But the way it's written, I would assume that is the requirement because it's the exact charge that you pay.
Nancy,
So
can
you
I
would-
chime in?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, don't try to contact Visa, Discover, American Express, and MasterCard. They're not going to talk to you. You have to speak with your processor, whoever your bank processor is, or if you're with Heartland, for example, WorldPay, you need to speak with your credit card processor. Secondly, and this is my biggest complaint about this bill, merchants don't know what that fee is. If I show up with a Mileage Plus card from United, the fee is going to be 1.95%. That's just the fee itself from the bank. That is not including the other interchange fees that are charged. The other part that I don't like is I understand where they were going with the debit cards, but if I show up with a business debit card, it can be 1.8% instead of 0.05%. Or if it's not a regulated debit bank card, and I won't get into the weeds over what that's about, it can still be 0.5% or 0.8%. The point I guess I'm trying to make is there is no way for merchants to know exactly the fee of every card that comes through at the time of the transaction. Now, if they are not on Interchange Plus pricing, they will never know what the fee was for each card, because when a processor puts a merchant on what we call tiered pricing, which is, different levels, it's all bundled into one. So it's really will be next to impossible for the enforcement of this to figure out. Like I say, I came in and said, Evergreen Crafters is charging, a 2% fee. And I'm like, well, I don't like that. And they, I went to the Consumer Protection and the Attorney General got involved. They would literally have to dig through statements to figure out what that fee was in order to say you're in violation. So to kind of wrap it up, what is written here is not realistic as far as enforcement. 2%, you're going to cover pretty much most of your fees. As you said, the average is around 3%. But it can range anywhere from 1.5% to 3.5%, depending on your business and your card type. And the other part of this that really is left out because it's so difficult, if you swipe a card, it's a different rate than if you chip a card than if you type in a card. So it's like, yeah, exactly. And that's the reality of this. So that's, I just want to let everybody know that's what's on the backside.
And I'll just chime in real quick with the political reality around this legislation. It's funny, there were not a lot of people fighting against this legislation. However, there were a lot of legislators that had very particular views on businesses charging what they would consider the cost of doing business back to the consumer, which is why this bill ended up in the state it is. It would have been a very different bill had that not happened. And there might be opportunities in the future to change that in legislation, but I just wanted to put that out there for everyone to understand kind of that political reality.
I have a couple
Okay.
questions.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna
Sorry.
say. Let's ask the questions because this sounds very murky.
And this is just kind of off the side a little bit. So that fee that we would charge, that 2%, 1.5%, whatever, that becomes income then that I have to claim because it's a fee. Now I've got to pay tax on that income. Also, the processor is going to have to be responsible. I mean, I can't see us every time especially in a restaurant, I'm not in a restaurant, but every time you run a transaction, go look to see what kind of card it is. So this is going to fall back on the processor, which of course is going to increase what we're paying them. So I
No.
don't see the real benefit in charging this fee. If you could help me out with that.
Yes, I can actually help you out as far as the processor charging an additional fee. We as processors actually love this because our portion of what we get, contrary to popular belief, is a little tiny bit. The lion's share of these credit card charges go back to the bank that issued the card. So the credit card company or the credit card companies, the processor companies, what we do is we're not going to raise our rates because you're charging that fee back to the customer. In fact, in my case with Heartland, I have to get certified to actually set up a business with this type of surcharging. And there are other rules. This is also, I'm sure Nick may be familiar with this. The brands themselves also have regulations on how to do this, and they have limitations because what they don't want is merchants to be making money off of charging a convenience fee. So you were right about trying to figure out what the fee is. I mean, it's not possible. It's not realistic. However, the credit card I keep wanting to say that, I've got that in my head from the commercials. But the processing companies, we're not, and if your processing company, and forgive me, this is my commercial, if your processing company raises your rates because you're doing this, you need another processing company.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So,
And
but it's still income I'm going to get taxed on.
Yes.
And I can talk about that because that's
Okay.
something that restaurants quite frequently run into a problem with. Yes, this will count as a service fee, just like any other service fee. So it is considered revenue to the business. So you have to account for it that way. And then it also is pre-tax. So sales tax does need to be collected on this as well because it is a service fee, which means you're going to have to remit the sales tax back to the state on that as well.
Yeah. Seems like a lot of work for a couple of pennies. You know what I mean? And that.
It's a business decision. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, in the conversations that we've had with restaurateurs since, just because in the restaurant industry, you know, there's a lot of price sensitivity, especially with our customers, especially now with where inflation is. And a lot of our guys aren't likely to go down this route just because they've kind of already stretched their pricing to where they can with their customers.
Mhm.
However, hopefully in the future that maybe there's an opportunity for them to find an easy way to utilize this. We'll see. But that's kind of what, when I've had conversations with restaurateurs about this bill, that's what they've been telling me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for answering my questions.
Anybody else have a question that they want to ask?
Yes, I do. What about customers that have a debit card, but then they want to use it as a credit card?
So the way I understand it, and Phil, you know more about the processing of these things than I do. The way I understand it, if it is processed as a credit card, you could charge the fee. If it is processed as a debit card, you cannot.
And processing as a debit card means that they're actually keying in their PIN number. Again, there's no way to know. I mean, you know if they key it in at that point. However, you don't know what which trying to go back and say this transaction was a debit transaction after you just took 100 transactions during the day, I mean, it's not realistic. You know, the idea behind the debit card is the fees are next to nothing. And the debit card is supposed to be the same thing as paying cash or paying with a check. And the reality of it is it still isn't. There are still what we call interchange fees. When I use that word, that term covers all of the fees that your processor pays on behalf of the merchant. That is the bank fee, the transaction fee, the brand fee, because yes, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover are also collecting money in there as well.
So when I go to buy gas or groceries, I need to make sure I'm using my debit card. Because I'm assuming everybody's gonna, after July 1st, Kroger and whoever else is gonna add this processing fee. Is that right?
I haven't
You know,
talked
if
to
it's
those.
available,
I haven't talked to those groups. I mean, I've got a pretty good relationship with their lobbyist. I could find out if they
yeah, I would be
having those
interested.
conversations.
Mhm.
I do know that the petroleum marketers, which is most of your convenience stores and gas stations in the state, they were the lead group on this bill. And then the retail council was heavily involved, and that does include your large retailers, your grocery stores, Target, Walmart, those types of places. So they were very interested in this. As we've discussed in this conversation, it's a little bit more complicated than it is simple.
Right.
So I can't tell you whether or not they've found a way to figure it out. They've got some pretty intelligent lawyers that might have found a way to figure it out, but I don't know.
So to
So,
clarify,
but
if it-
remember
sorry.
that they've got to have that line on your receipt.
Mhm.
There's got to be a line showing exactly that they're charging you a credit card processing fee. So after July 1st, take a look at your receipt. If you see that a business that you frequent is charging you that, probably 2%, then you know to start using your debit card.
Well,
Right.
and
But
also,
I think we all should become really good at looking at our receipts after July 1st.
and
I
also,
think we should let our
Nancy,
consumers, everybody know. Yeah.
and also Nancy, as you've got posted on the shared screen right now, they're going to have this
Right.
sign up in a place where the customer is going to see it. So if you think of a gas station, you don't have to go inside to pay for gas, which
Mhm.
means that is going to have to be posted at every gas pump where the customer is going to see it, as well as indoors. And then in King Soopers, Kroger, Safeway, all those places, this is going to have to be at the self-checkout, at the checkout. It's going to have to be posted. So you'll see if they're going to be charging you these fees or not.
And to keep this into perspective, large retailers and the petroleum industry, they have software so that they can actually,
Right.
zoom in on what the charge is at the time, because they're doing things on the back end that are in real time. But for the simple business owner, if you've got a retail shop, you've got a restaurant, you're not going to have that kind of software. And the processor does have the ability, that's why I say you need to go to your processor, does have the ability to program your terminals to actually say, this is your fee. Now, a lot of this is going to be, your processor saying, hey, I can only market it 2%, or I can only make every charge 1.5%. So you're depending on the equipment that you're dealing with is going to dictate, how accurate your percentage fee is on your receipts.
And I will say there are other states that have started or that have been doing this. We've been getting questions from restaurateurs that have moved into Colorado from other states about whether or not they can charge these fees. So I would assume the large national companies have figured out how to pull this off. But I don't want to say for certain that they're going to.
Okay, I want to keep to the timeline for everyone. I know you've all got businesses to open and run, and so just want to see, are there any other last questions that you want to, anyone wants to ask here this morning? But please know that you're welcome to email me after this or to call the chamber office.
Thanks, Nancy.
All right,
Thank you for providing this.
anytime. Thanks so much for joining, and thanks Nick and Philip for joining us this morning. I appreciate both of you.
Thanks so much.
Our
Have a
pleasure.
great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.